And I think if the Conservative Party wants to revive in a manner that's remotely comparable to, the example of Meloni, you need that charismatic, exceptional figure. And, I think Kemi Badenoch, maybe she's a sort of B- politician.
Well, I'm Hugo Rifkind, and now we're going to be unpacking the politics of the day. We're going to be trying to measure the palpable excitement in the studio as a new round of budget speculation begins. We'll talk about how much Rupert Lowe is earning from social media and about whether instant gratification is going out of fashion. But I, nonetheless, am instantly gratified to be joined by Times columnist James Marriott. Hello, James.
I'm equally gratified to be in your lovely new studio.
The gratification is just oozing out of your voice. Yeah,
isn't it?
Yeah, you sound very, very gratified. And equally gratified, I would hope, Sunday Times columnist Charlotte Ivers.
Hello, Hugo. I'm kind of fine about it. Yeah.
Well, all right. How have you both been? You had a gratifying summer?
I've just come back from holiday. Have you as well?
I've also come back from holiday.
Right.
It was delightful and cold on the west coast of Ireland.
Right.
Yeah, I've been visiting my dad in Ayrshire, west coast of Scotland, and there was lots of talk. One day the temperature reached 28 degrees.
Wow.
That was big. Yeah. I had to sort of contain my extreme envy of everybody there.
I've been very jealous of people in cold and dismal places the last few weeks. Look, we've got a lot to talk about, so let's crack on, because we're off. It is day one of budget speculation, just 9 weeks and 1 day to go till the budget itself. On the front page of the Times today, Andy Burnham has refused to rule out tax rises in John Healey's first budget. He told ITV he won't be unrealistic about the public finances. James, how palpable is your excitement about some more speculation on a scale of 1 to 10?
Do I have to pretend to be thrilled?
Yes, you do. Yes.
I mean, I guess as a journalist, we have to be excited about these things. Yeah, the budget comes earlier and earlier every year now, doesn't it? It's like Halloween and Christmas. I only wish that it came with little cakes or a special delicacy you could buy in supermarkets like hot cross buns. But in fact, it's just solely, in my life, a slightly depressing thing to get my head around.
We should introduce a special budget snack that they can sort of wheel out in the shops just to get people particularly excited. Charlotte, the reason this is a serious story, serious faces on, is that the country does need to find billions more for defence. It's not coincidence that Andy Burnham was talking about this while in Ukraine. We've got to pay for all the cost of living announcements. We've got to pay for the war in the Middle East. It's pushing up inflation, and all the help we're giving in Ukraine as well, and let alone the sort of ongoing problems with the supply of oil and everything. Perhaps the issue here is that we shouldn't just have one big bang announcement every year that's supposed to make it all better.
Yeah, possibly. I can certainly see the case for that. It was interesting reading in the Times this morning about Andy Burnham and his Chancellor writing to all the other government departments saying, we're going to have to find some savings, boys, because here are some things that we have announced that aren't funded. They are our changes to technical education, our plans on to help people with the cost of living, and all of our devolution plans, which is sort of everything that Andy Burnham has announced. And you go, oh no, are we in real trouble here? Is this another one of these governments that just sort of says stuff and doesn't really know how they're going to fund them, and doesn't really have the guts to either put up taxes or make some sort of serious cuts? And actually what Andy Burnham was saying this morning about wanting to level with the country, needing to make tough decisions, I know those all sound like hideous cliches, but it did at least seem to acknowledge that, okay, somebody's taxes are going to have to go up. This is not going to be pleasant. And for a while I've been complaining that politicians don't tend to be honest with the public about the fact that we just don't have the money and it needs to come from somewhere. So, major touch wood. Maybe this is good. But yeah, it could be spread out a bit more. You're right. But then also the uncertainty associated with that. If any given morning the Chancellor could wake up and go, you, Hugo Rifkind, are paying 10% more tax, you probably wouldn't be thrilled about it. So I think maybe isolating it to once a year is good in terms of consumer confidence.
Well, there was a point where the spring statement ended up as a sort of second budget. You had a sort of two-headed budget. I want to call it a Hydra budget. That might be incorrect. I'm not sure how many heads a Hydra had. I'm sure James can correct me in just a moment. But does that mean the more budgets we have, the more we speculate about budgets, all politics, all political reporting becomes is wondering about what's going to happen in the next budget? But it kind of is already.
And that's really bad based on what I've just been saying about this idea that people shouldn't just wake up every morning and have something new to account for in their finances. Particularly last summer, I remember every other day you had something in the newspapers basically saying, hi Charlotte, just so you know, next year you're going to have way less money than you do. And you go, what? And you suddenly have to kind of think and readjust. And I remember some friends were kind of trying to sell houses or flats at that point, and people were not buying or selling until after the budget, and it just puts everyone in this sense of stasis, and also means everyone starts desperately squirreling away money and saving, which obviously is not good for the economy either. So it's not great. I almost think we're quite late in the day to be starting to speculate about the budget. I mean, we had something earlier this year, didn't we? Earlier this summer about stamp duty and whether that was going to be abolished and in a place of some sort of house value tax. But yeah, it hasn't been as bad as last year, so that's something.
James, Andy Burnham, he likes to be liked. He wants to be thought of as a popular guy who does things that people approve of. You know, gives Britain a nice warm cup of tea feeling all the time. Does he have the minerals to make difficult choices in a budget?
It's going to be interesting to see. Things suddenly feel a bit more, as September approaches, things are suddenly feeling a bit more back to school and a bit more back to Starmer, aren't they? We spent Keir Starmer's brief premiership, I think, having quite a gloomy story about how we all things are really difficult, hard choices were going to have to be made. And I think this was viewed as one of the weaknesses of the Starmer government, that didn't have a good story to tell about Britain, didn't have a sort of optimistic vision. One of the things that Andy Burnham has provided, so far, and effectively and very effectively on TikTok, is this idea that he's going to do things, he understands people's lives, he can make the little touches that might help us feel like the future is a slightly better place. Unfortunately, when you actually have to do a budget and you have John Healey, who's resigned from his previous job over the need to commit lots of money to defence, when you've said that your big thing is social care, when you've made all these unfunded announcements, I think optimism is going to be harder to maintain. I personally think that so much of politics is being able to sell whatever slightly shoddy product you've got. And I do think that sort of, even if we do end up with, as people are increasingly saying, a kind of continuity Starmerism in the actual approach to the budget, I sort of think it will matter that Burnham will sell it a bit more, and maybe he'll have something chirpy to say about why we're all paying more for defence spending. I don't know. I don't think I could sell it to the public, but I trust that he might. If anyone can do it, maybe he can.
Chirpy pain. That's something to look forward to. Look, while Andy Burnham was in Ukraine, Kemi Badenoch was in Rome, where she met the Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni for a coffee. Meloni told Badenoch to be your own woman and stand your ground, and she warned against a deal with Reform UK. This morning, Badenoch tweeted, "Once upon a time, it was Italy's economy in the doldrums. Today, Italy's borrowing costs are lower than Britain's. Markets and investors have more confidence in Giorgia Meloni's Italy than in Labour's Britain." And she also said people wrote Giorgia Meloni off, saying she wouldn't last 6 months. In 10 days, she'll be leading the longest-serving government in the history of the Italian Republic. She is a straight-talking, no-nonsense woman who knows what she believes and stands her ground. I mean, the longest-serving government in the history of the Italian Republic, Charlotte, is a bit like the tallest of Snow White's 7 dwarves, of course. But you can see the appeal for Kemi in modelling herself on Meloni, can't you?
You can, and I think it's rather interesting that Meloni's telling Badenoch not to do a deal with Reform, because there would have been a time where Meloni would have looked much more allied with Reform, I would say, than the Conservatives. She sort of managed to shift towards the centre while still keeping people on side from further right in her country. And gosh, if Kemi Badenoch could do that, I think she'd think all of her Christmases had come at once to be able to unite those two. And I think Badenoch, it's so tricky, isn't it? Because I do think she's doing quite a good job. But she's also, the numbers just don't bear that out at all. She's doing a good job for any Conservative leader of the opposition in the last, I don't know, call it 30, 40 years.
But it's a bit like being the longest serving leader in the history of the Italian Republic. Right?
But all of the external circumstances are so weighted against her. I'm inclined to say she should keep doing what she's doing, which is what Meloni told her to, not try and reach out to Reform, not do any alliances with them, because there does seem to be a ceiling on Reform support. There do seem to be a lot of people who will vote for anyone to keep Reform out. We've seen that in basically every recent by-election. And there do seem to be a lot of people across the country who are very turned off by Reform and who would like something on the centre-right. I'm sort of inclined to row in behind Meloni, say, hold the course, and sorry, it's not working.
And yet, James, the parallel, the precursor of Meloni herself is that she got elected by, as Charlotte said, seeming to be quite close to that sort of Nigel Farage type thing. And in government, I wouldn't say she's tacked left in government, she doesn't appear to have done that, but she certainly moderated her language, moderated her image, been allowed to moderate her image. And she sort of seems to be slightly advising Kemi Badenoch to be like the person she is now, not the person she was when she got elected, which isn't necessarily in Badenoch's interests.
Yeah, I entirely agree. I'm not sure that there is a direct lesson for Badenoch to draw from Meloni. As you say, Meloni in Italian politics is once much more like a Farage figure than like a Badenoch figure. And the lesson from across European politics, unfortunately, has been that the centre-right parties have tended to be wiped out by right-wing incumbents over the last decade. I mean, Meloni herself is now facing a challenge from an Italian party that's even further to the right. So I'm not sure that lesson applies. I think the other thing about Meloni is that if there's any lesson to draw from her, is that she belongs to a series of leaders around the world whose success depends less on reviving a party or manipulating policy in a clever manner. She's just a charismatic and effective politician, and I think if there's a future for the right or the centre-right, it's going to depend on finding this charismatic figure who can just come into politics and almost single-handedly bend it to their will. The evidence so far is that Kemi Badenoch, she might be decent, she might be all right, she might be doing an okay job. She's not that person, and I think if the Conservative Party wants to revive in a manner that's remotely comparable to, the example of Meloni, you need that charismatic, exceptional figure. And, I think Kemi Badenoch, maybe she's a sort of B- politician.
Well,
she's not that person.
Before we move on from this, Charlotte, you look at Meloni's advice to Badenoch. Isn't that Meloni giving Badenoch advice that reflects well on Meloni? Because she wants to be seen as this kind of like sort of centre-right figure that's fighting off the right. And so if she says this, she establishes herself as that figure. But as I said to James, that's not who she was. That's not how she got elected.
Yeah, it doesn't mean she's wrong though. I suppose politicians say all sorts of things for all sorts of reasons, and occasionally they happen to hit on the truth.
Even a stopped clock tells the right time twice a day. Coming up, we're going to be talking about the alarming TikTok joyriding craze. We're also going to be talking about how much Rupert Lowe appears to make on social media. First, let's get the latest news with Andy. Hugo Rifkind here on Times Radio, currently unpacking the politics of the day and other stuff with James Marriott and Charlotte Ivers. The next thing I want to talk about, guys, TikTok is promoting high-speed police chase videos to young users by labelling them as thrilling. The social media giant also described one motorway pursuit as exciting in an AI-generated summary, even though the viral clip should have been removed for breaching the company's rules on prohibited content. There is a focus on this issue after the crash in Middlesbrough at the weekend, and although the local force says there's no evidence that occurred as a result of filming for TikTok, at least one of the young men killed does appear to have appeared in multiple videos depicting dangerous driving. James, as the nation's #1 fan of social media, were you surprised to learn that this new horror was happening?
Confirmed all my worst prejudices. No, I'm not surprised. I think the idea of trends spreading through the media is actually not unique to TikTok. It's been, I think you can trace that as a phenomenon back to print. People reading in the 19th century stories of horrific murders, and you get copycat crimes. The thing that's unique about TikTok is that it's completely, it's just so poorly regulated compared to the mainstream media. Human behaviour is socially contagious. People see things, they read about things, and then they go and do it themselves. That's just an inevitable aspect of the way that human beings behave. It's also why, for instance, newspapers are so strictly regulated about the way they report on, for instance, suicides. We could only say very limited things about a case of suicide because we know that human behaviour is contagious and people might copy that behaviour. These kinds of rules are not applied with remotely the same severity on social media as they are on traditional media. Can you imagine if the BBC or ITV started broadcasting people driving the wrong way down the motorway as an exciting lifestyle choice?
Yeah, sure.
It's just beyond the it's beyond the realms of
even as a plot line in a drama. It would be too controversial.
It would be crazy. Yeah. It would be a stupid episode of Black Mirror. The fact this is allowed on TikTok, we've all allowed ourselves to come to see this as kind of, it's sort of inevitable. This is the kind of, social media, it's unregulated, there's nothing we can do. It's actually completely mad. Social media platforms should be regulated much more like traditional news outlets and traditional publishers. And it's not news. If you can hope that something good could ever come of this, it's perhaps that will wake us up to how completely deranged it is that this sort of content is allowed to be promoted on social media.
I can remember, Charlotte, quite a long time ago. I think when I had small kids, I was on a train with my small kids, and they were excellently well behaved. And there was, as I'm sure wouldn't surprise you, and there was another mother with a couple of kids who were screaming, running around, running riot. And her approach to this was clearly like, hey, this is everyone's problem. And I sort of think the social media companies, they are like that about their products. They create these things that have these devastating impacts in all kinds of new areas, and this is just yet another one. And they're kind of like, well, we can't fix this. This is everyone's problem. It's like, no, it's you. You did this. You did this to us.
Yes, they did do this, but didn't we also do this in that
I didn't.
The collective
did I?
You, Hugo, did it. The collective we, in that this stuff only surfaces to the top of social media sites like TikTok because it is what people want to see. These sites prey on our worst instincts, but those worst instincts are very much there. It's interesting, James was talking about this kind of mimetic behaviour people have, because there are all these kind of debates, weren't there, about video games and about whether violence in video games would lead to particularly young men being violent in real life. And I was sort of thinking about that as you two were chatting. You know, are we in a similar moral panic? But it's different, isn't it? Because this is real. You're looking at people like you driving the wrong way down the motorway if you're a 19-year-old boy who's a bit of a thrill seeker, and that makes it more likely, I think, that you're going to engage in copycat behaviour. So actually, I've just come back from holiday and I spent a lot of it reading a fantastic biography of Nietzsche called "I Am Dynamite," well reviewed by you, the Dust Jacket.
Indeed, it was.
Told me,
yes.
yeah. And it talks about what would it have been, the 1890s or so, after the publication of Crime and Punishment. There were a bunch of young men who killed their girlfriends or themselves because they wanted to copy Raskolnikov in Crime and Punishment. That entire book is 300, 400 pages of a man whinging because he's so miserable and so tormented by the fact that he killed someone. And yet, nonetheless, people read it and went, yeah, I'm going to go and kill someone. People are so hard to predict. And as James says, that's why you have to be so careful about things like reporting suicide. It's so easy to put an idea in someone's head.
Yeah, but this is it's just so glaring. And the fact that people enjoy doing it and want to watch it, so what? People enjoyed watching bear baiting or bare knuckle boxing. People enjoy watching dogfights. It doesn't stop you banning them, and it doesn't stop you enforcing it when other people promote them. Sticking with social media, Rupert Lowe, the leader of Restore Britain, is on course to earn as much from the social media platform X as he does from his salary as an MP. He has apparently earned £932 an hour for his posts on X since the start of the year, according to his own declarations in the Register of MPs' financial interests. His hourly rate rose steeply again this summer, reaching £1,476 an hour since the start of June. Obviously, this is his own self-disclosed behaviour, so he may well be spending more time, like as with everybody, to be spending more time on these platforms than he wishes to admit. But it's more than twice the £377 an hour on average he earned last year. This is mad, isn't it? Someone who leads a political party, who is a political figure, is also profiting hugely by spreading his message, thus being on these algorithms motivated to spread messages that spread further and thus are incendiary.
Yes, I mean, social media continues to send the modern world to hell in a handcart. You'll be unsurprised to hear me concluding. I mean, I guess one comparison is with the fact that MPs have often had newspaper columns. You know, Boris Johnson wrote for the Telegraph, who is an MP. The difference, I think, is the point that you make, which is the incentives that work on social media platforms, which, as we all now know, are towards hatred, division, outrage, often fabrication. Elon Musk's Twitter being almost, the shining, or rather kind of, I don't know, whatever the opposite of shining.
Yes.
Sort of the bleakest and darkest example of this.
It's shining, but it's Darth Vader's sword rather than Luke Skywalker's.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I mean, in that incredibly brutal and competitive attention economy, the worst possible stuff does well, and anybody whose income depends on it will be driven to the worst possible stuff. There was a really, really good but also very depressing investigation by Jim Waterson's outfit, London Centric, about influencers on TikTok who were making anti-migrant content on TikTok and making money out of it, because TikTok also has a similar deal where you can get paid for producing content. And when you go and talk to these people, they're actually not particularly politically radical in themselves. They're just responding to the incentives of a platform that rewards division, rewards hatred. If you yourself are already inclined towards division and you're then getting paid for it, that just seems like an unbelievably toxic mechanism to have in our politics, and presumably it's only going to become more widespread. I can't imagine Rupert Lowe is going to be the last person who wants to make money out of social media as a politician. Yeah,
well, I mean, it's slightly it's the Norman Mailer quote about celebrity: the mask eats the face, and it's and when somebody is rewarded for their behaviour, rewarded for their speech in certain ways, obviously that makes them more inclined to do it, at least in some cases. Should political leaders be earning at all off social media platforms, Charlotte?
I agree with James that there is a comparison here with political leaders earning off a newspaper column. I mean, Nigel Farage having his GB News show, that's perhaps a little bit more controversial, but you can imagine him if he was just making documentaries or something rather than hosting a current affairs show. That might be a little bit different. I'm broadly in favour of MPs having second jobs. I think it is good for MPs to kind of see the world a bit, have a bit of variety.
But a second job post posting on X.
Well, exactly. That's what I was going to say. And usually,
Virtually my second
what I mean
job.
is, it's nice when MPs are barristers or something because it's good for them to see the state of the court system. So, sure, is it good that MPs are making money posting on X? I sort of want us to have a bit more of a debate and a conversation here. So to be able to disagree with James, no, it's not.
Yeah.
It's obviously bad. It's just demeaning, isn't it? It does incentivize this kind of audience capture. It incentivizes, as James says, saying things which are likely to kind of cause outrage, go viral, or otherwise create a kind of clapping seal response in one's own side. And I think you see this with everyone. You've seen it for a long time. I've seen a lot of smart people get radicalized in one direction or another by social media because half of the world is clapping them, half the world is telling them they're evil.
And they've got to choose one.
And you got to choose one. And so you become more entrenched, more extreme in your views, and increasingly as well you develop sets of views in a way that there is nothing about how someone thinks about tax policy that should tell you how they are going to view Israel and what Israel's been doing to defend itself recently, and yet that will be pretty united with another set of views. I can probably tell you based on what people think of Israel, what they're going to think of, I don't know, welfare, what they're going to think of criminal justice as well. And that's because we are getting so consolidated into these kind of in-groups and out-groups. And it's a real shame.
Well, look, speaking of further divisive things, it is time for our Prince Harry section. If you mind terribly, hold your breath until we're finished. Worst case scenario, you'll just pass out. Most Brits do not think the taxpayer should pay for a security detail for Prince Harry and his family, believing they should pay for all or at least part of it themselves, a poll has revealed. It also found that most Britons want Harry to reconcile with Prince William, but a third thought the chances were unrealistic. Charlotte, why does this story still have such a hold on people?
It has a hold on people, I think, because the royals are our grand national soap opera. We like to see ourselves reflected in them. We like the idea that they are human just like us, even though they are sort of up there in the sky. And that's sort of true of all celebrities. But I think with the royals, there's a layer of something else. It's something a bit more serious than just this person's in Hello Magazine or this person's in my favourite film. It allows us to sort of feel like these things matter. And maybe they do to a greater or lesser extent. I think that we see ourselves reflected in the royals, and therefore how they behave reflects on our kind of national self-esteem. It is not good for the national self-esteem when Prince Andrew is sort of disgracing us every which way. So that's why we care. I'm slightly at my limit of caring on this particular story, but then it has been several years.
James, do you see yourself more reflected in Prince Harry or Prince William?
Prince Harry. In Meghan, in fact.
Everyone hates him.
No, I mean, God forbid anyone should see themselves reflected in the royal family, probably. I sort of have this, maybe this is a mad optimism, uncharacteristic of me, but I kind of think, are we not all getting a bit sick of this? And is that not slightly reflected in the fact that Meghan and Harry are moving back to the UK?
Well, they think they can. Yeah.
Well, perhaps sensing that, well, maybe yes, maybe that they can and people aren't quite so furious about it. I think perhaps also sensing that they're just drifting to the edge of the international consciousness. I think Americans are now pretty fed up with them. I don't think Meghan's Netflix shows, of which I've watched a few, have particularly helped her. And I kind of slightly wonder whether they think now that they've, floundered in the big pond in America, they'll move back to the little pond and see if they can grab onto our attention here. I hope that people are increasingly over it. I think we know the script. We've heard everything we could possibly hear about the interesting thing, which is them falling out with the royal family. Well, I just don't know. I mean, maybe this is not just the maddest naive optimism, but what on earth is there left to say? I think even people who really hate Meghan Markle must just be a little bit like, fine, is there not somebody new to focus my ire on?
Well, let's move on to somebody new we could focus our ire on, which is James Marriott, because it's now that time of the week.
And I think that one of the people who has diagnosed the problem best is the Times writer James Marriott.
James, you've been writing in the Times today that in an age of instant gratification, Victorian-style self-discipline might be making a comeback. Explain.
Yes, well, this is me advocating for a return to Victorian values once again. A great inspiration from the thinkers of the 19th century. This was a little bit of this is something that's sort of been bubbling away in my head as a column idea for a while. There's been so much talk recently about what are the skills and talents and abilities that will matter in the modern world, and people tend to say things like social skills or creativity in the age of AI, or all this sort of thing. And something I increasingly think about modern life is that the real skill that I think is people are sort of worried about making the case for explicitly because it sounds so fusty and old-fashioned, but I think is actually, if you have it, is a great benefit, is self-discipline. I think if there's anything that distinguishes the modern world from the problems that we have in the modern world from the problems that our ancestors faced in the past, is that we're just surrounded by petty temptation. Junk food, social media, addictive TikTok algorithms, cherry-flavoured vapes, all this kind of stuff. And I think self-restraint and the ability to go through life resisting minor temptations and having a little bit of self-control is an unbelievably underrated life skill. I always think this, looking at people running up and down the canal near me in East London, it's a completely horrible and difficult thing to do. And I've tried to run and I absolutely hated it. And it requires, if you want to do it, an enormous amount of self-discipline to get yourself into either the broiling heat of central London or the freezing cold when you get to November and December. But the ability they have to do that, which I completely lack, is an extraordinary thing, because in the modern world you can't stay slim and fit without effort as you once could 50 years ago. You have to try, and if you can try, you're going to reap benefits in 50 years' time. The same thing goes with, being addicted to your phone and scrolling constantly. We increasingly know that if you struggle to resist the temptation of your screen, there are all kinds of terrible things are going to happen to your cognitive ability, your concentration, if you're a kid, your academic results. And I just think the modern world is so full of temptations. If you want to succeed in it, this Victorian power of self-discipline, which we don't talk about much, is increasingly a superpower.
So firstly, I'd say that I think there is a degree. Speaking of someone who has a relatively addictive personality and is, of course, has a body like a temple, I would say that the exercise is itself actually quite addictive in a way that's not that different from all the other kinds of stuff. But I also think, as a I'm born in the 70s, grew up in the 80s, came of age in the 90s. I'm now alive with you people. I would say I can sort of see, even over my lifespan, period of time when in the late 70s, early 80s, you didn't need to worry about fulfilling every desire all the time because you simply couldn't, because there was scarcity of everything. Then there was the 90s, there was this sort of glut of explosive hedonism because you could suddenly do all this stuff. You could drink, you could party, you could travel, you could spend. People were rich. And now I really like the idea that expressed in your column that people are finally getting on top of kind of how to regulate that, how to deal with living in, although not in material terms, in terms of experiential terms, an existence of sort of overabundance. Charlotte, do you know what I mean?
I do know what you mean, and it's interesting. I had a few thoughts while reading James's column. The first one is that I actually don't think running is that good for you. Obviously, it's great to get your heart rate up, but it's really bad for your knees. So when James was saying these people are going to be thriving in their 80s, well, I'm not. I thought, I don't know, they might have had a couple of knee replacements.
They'll be thriving while sitting down.
Yes, exactly, and with fantastic heart health. No, but I was sort of thinking, do I practice this? Because I exercise a reasonable amount. I read quite a lot, but those are both things I enjoy, so that's not really discipline. And then I actually thought about social media, as we were just discussing, and I thought about Aristotle, because I've been worried recently. I've been thinking about Aristotle's ideas about virtue and the idea that you are what you repeatedly do, and there is sort of no innate you, but you sort of become the thing you frequently are. And I've noticed that on the tube, around and about the place, I am increasingly irritable and I'm increasingly judgmental of like what other people are doing with their children. Are people in my way? Are people getting up for the old lady and stuff? And that, I think, comes from scrolling through X and reading all these stories of bad behaviour and why is this, this person did this and my theory on child rearing is this or whatever. And it's just sort of worming into my brain and it's making me a worse person. So I'm sort of in a bit of a process at the moment of trying to cultivate virtue and trying to stop reading that stuff, and also trying to stop being nasty and judging people on the tube. And it really is, it's sort of practicing, and it's almost like slapping yourself every time you go the wrong way. And again, it's this constant input. As you say, it's a bit like having the hamburger on every corner. It's so juicy to be able to go, yes, I hate you and I'm good and I'm great compared to you, look how classy I am, my children would never scream like that. But no, you've got to sort of hold yourself back. So yeah, I think it's really hard, but I do think it is both a good way to get ahead, as James says, but also you need to be able to cultivate virtue. To be a good person, you need to resist all of these things.
Yeah, difficult. Look, speaking of perfect children, I've been speaking to a man called Arthur Zay on my Times radio show. He's a father who had an IVF baby using advanced genetic screening, which means it promises to be able to choose genes to make your children healthier, smarter or taller. Here's a little bit of what he told me.
So now we can say, oh, your kid's chance of being like 6'4", or I guess for him it was 6'3", is, 80, 90 something percent, right? And so now that they can anchor that in absolute numbers, and like same thing for IQ and, for other risk factors. As you give the government more power to regulate exactly things like this, I think that is what leads us to some of these sci-fi dystopias that people worry about, where, we're practicing coercive eugenics.
So I want to talk a little bit about the concept of designer babies. It used to be this thing that people worried about as a theoretical future. It's now obviously here. He was quite comfortable about talking about choosing not only the embryo with the least risk of disease, but one that was likely to be taller, prettier, all that kind of stuff. I really didn't like it. I'm trying to figure out why. James, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I have a similar revulsion from this sort of thing. I mean, I guess in some ways it's irrational. I think if designer babies were democratically allotted and everybody had the same chance to have a tall, beautiful child, I would feel marginally more comfortable with it. The really dystopian scenario is that wealthy people pay to have taller and more beautiful children, and everybody else, people like us, have to have children that look like ourselves. And that would be hideous. That would obviously be hideously unfair. I think there's also, isn't there a kind of danger? I mean, not to repeat cliches, but of human society, we like to say diversity is our strength. Different kinds of people, different kinds of ways of looking at the world. People who have the experience of being beautiful and less beautiful, and tall and short. And if we're all sort of tall demigods, isn't that quite a boring future? And perhaps also one that has less interesting perspectives that we can all share with each other.
So it's something I found philosophically fascinating while speaking to him. One of the things he said in the interview was, I just sort of think if I hadn't done this, 10, 15 years down the line, it turns out that my son has some kind of sort of genetic problem. And I would be saying to myself, man, I could have done something to stop that. And I was saying, well, no, you couldn't have done. What you could have done is aborted that baby and had a different one. So your actual son literally wouldn't be here. You'd just have a different, more perfect one, which he seemed to really kind of struggle with. But we don't sort of think in those terms. I don't think we should think in those terms.
I don't think we should. There's a really good book about this that was published, it must be coming out for 10, 15 years ago now, by Michael Sandel, the public philosopher, as he styles himself, at Harvard, and called The Case Against Perfection. And he sort of talks about this idea that it's not just about consequences, it's not just about inequality, as James says. That would be hideous if rich people suddenly had this sort of Uber race. But it is about something innate about the quality of being human and how we lose that. So he talks about the idea of enhancement at the Olympics. Why is it we don't let people just drug themselves up and see, can we see a man run 100 metres in 3 seconds? That'd be great. And actually there is an enhanced games now. But no, there's something about these games which we are trying to see the limits of what a human brilliance can be. And there is something valuable about being human. And I worry, and he worries, that all of these things are essentially trying to kind of create something that transcends that it isn't as human. And what are we if not, trying to be the versions of ourselves, of this creature that we are? It's sort of a bit like the question of, would you want to live forever? I think about this quite a lot. I'm in quite a kind of morbid mood at the moment, so I think about death a lot. But I was thinking, a lot of the value in our lives comes from the fact that we only have one of them. The fact that I have a husband who I love, if I could then just get another one of those for another 80 years, that would undermine quite a lot of what this is. And I think a lot of, pushing to be better at sport or smarter comes from engaging with the animal that you are in and trying to improve that through self-discipline, James Marriott.
I wouldn't like to live forever, but I would like to live for ages. And look, I think for showing us the absolute perfect potential and the maximum that ordinary human beings could be, Charlotte Ivers and James Marriott, thanks very much indeed. I'm Hugo Rifkind here on Times Radio.